Section 32 of the American Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynn Thompson. The American Egypt by Channing Arnold and Frederick J. Tabor Frost. Section 32. The Green Gold of Yucatan. 800 million Mexican dollars. 80 million pounds sterling. These are the profits which the score or so of Yucatecan henequen growers are said to have divided in the last 15 years. What then is this Pactolus plant from which has been crushed this river of wealth? It is true enough that half the world does not know how the other half lives, and this is a good example, for there is probably not 1% of Englishmen, and scarcely more than 10% of Americans, though the States is the main market for the staple product of Yucatan, who could tell you to what botanical family it belongs, or indeed that it is a plant at all. Henequen (Spanish henequen or yeniquen) is a fibre commercially known as sisal hemp, from the fact that it is obtained from a species of cactus, the Agave sisalensis, first cultivated around the tiny port of Sisal in Yucatan. The older Indian name for the plant is Agave ixtli. From its fleshy leaves is crushed out a fine fibre, which, from the fact that it resists damp better than ordinary hemp, is valuable for making ships' cables, but the real wealth-producing use of which is so bizarre that no one in 100 guesses would hit on it. It is used in the myriad corn-binding machines of America and Canada. They cannot use wire, and cheap string is too easily broken. Henequen is at once strong enough and cheap enough, hence the piles of money heaping up to the credit of Yucatecans in the banks of Merida. There is no doubt that henequen was known to and possibly cultivated by the ancient inhabitants of Yucatan, but its commercial value was not discovered until late in the 19th century. The first henequen plantation was formed in 1850. Soon there were several more, though they were one and all on the humblest scale both as regards extent and methods of cultivation. It was our good fortune to visit one of the very earliest, that of Yaxche, now the property of Señor Augusto Peon, and the photographs reproduced are of that estate. Señor Peon himself conducted us over it, and told us that as a lad he remembered the first cleaning being made in the woods for the Eldorado cactus about 1850. A mere acre, that was all. To-day he has close on 6,000 acres under cultivation on this farm alone, with villages containing 4,000 souls, and it would be quite rash to hazard a guess at his wealth. He is certainly a sterling millionaire 3 or 4 times over, and he told us that his income had actually doubled in less than 10 years. Such is henequen. But the plant was a long time winning its way to its present exalted position. Until within the last 30 years the only market for the fibre was the Mexican Republic itself, where fortunes were being coined by the crushing of yet another cactus, the Agave americana, or Meiji, from which is obtained the foul-smelling pulque, dearly loved drink of all Mexicans. And then 3 decades back henequen began to win a reputation abroad, particularly in the States. In 1880, 97,351 bales, weighing 39,501,725 pounds, and valued at about $1¾ million, were exported. In 1904, 627,700 bales, weighing about 207,141,000 pounds, and valued at $15,629,730, were exported, and during 1906 the amount shipped rose to 726,785 bales, each averaging 330 pounds in weight, and totaling in value between $25 and $26 million. Of these, 595,024 bales were sent to the United States, or 186,747 to New Orleans, 144,916 to Boston, 119,688 to New York, 63,620 to Texas City, 59,235 to Mobile, and 20,818 to Galveston. The remaining 131,761 bales going to various ports in Canada, Europe, and Cuba. These amazing figures tell their own tale of the growth of the staple industry of Yucatan. A local trade has in a few short years become almost a world monopoly, and from being a poor land the peninsula had become a Monte Cristo territory. Once the fibre was discovered by corn growers, the trade went up by leaps and bounds, but it was the Spanish-American War of 1898 which gave it its great boom, and it may be said to be still booming. The destruction and stoppage of the Manila hemp crops in the Philippines during the conflict gave the Yucatecans their chance. They met the shortage, and importers found that they had in the henequen fibre at once a cheaper and a stronger corn binder. To-day Yucatan can sell all the henequen she can grow, and every month sees more and more woodland reclaimed and prepared to bear its share in swelling the receipts of the Meridan mushroom millionaires. In northwest Yucatan you can travel mile after mile, league after league, and see absolutely nothing but henequen. It seems to need no soil. Out of the grey boulder-strewn ground stick the great green pineapple-like stalks crowned with a widely parted bunch of fleshy green leaves with black thorny points. Planted in even lines about 4 yards apart, they stretch endlessly towards the horizon, the monotony broken only here and there by the grey stone walls, like those of a Yorkshire farm, which mark off and enclose each plantation. As we wandered round this huge estate, Señor Peon explained to us the process through which henequen goes from planting till it is fibre white and clean. In preparing land for planting, it must first be cleared of all timber, and in the outlying districts from dawn till sundown one hears the ring of the axe as the Indians fell the trees. After this clearing comes a period, usually about a year, during which the land is allowed to lie fallow, the fallen timbers rotting and everything preparing for the flames. Towards the end of the dry season this burning takes place. This is also the method of preparing the milpas or maize fields for their new crops, and thus in April all over the country you see mighty columns of black smoke rising into the cloudless blue, like the smoke of burnt offerings to the harvest god. If rain does not come, and it very rarely does, the fallen timber and dried undergrowth burn for days until there is nothing left but a few black smouldering tree trunks, which by another season will have been effectually dealt with by the broad-mandibled digging-ant and the myriad woodlice. A second year is allowed to pass before the henequen is planted. Usually maize is sown on the clearing for the season, and then once again they set fire to it, and with this second conflagration the ground is ready. But the planter must wait for the rains. These come towards the end of May. Dark clouds roll up, and between 5 and 6 o'clock each day a sharp shower may be expected. By the middle of June the floods of the sky break loose, and for hours each day and night the baked earth is deluged. Now the haciendado must get his plants ready. This is an easy matter if he has no other plantations. In any of these where the agave is old and has had most of its leaves cut away, he can find what he wants. From some of the plants a long stalk-like stem will be seen shooting up from the centre, and this will have thrown out branches from which the seeds have grown and fallen to the ground. Thus around its base there will be young seedlings in plenty sprouting. The largest of these are taken. On the bigger haciendas there are regular nurseries for these seedlings, which are carefully fostered for a year or so, that they may be of a fair size when they are needed for planting out. These are planted in the new clearing in rows about 14 feet apart, each plantling being 8 feet from its neighbor. Now there is a wait of 5 or 6 years before the first crop of leaves can be cut, but if this is rather a wearily long time for the planter to wait for his returns, at least it is not expensive, for the plants need little or no attention. All that is needed is to keep the spaces between the rows fairly free from weeds which would otherwise smother the young cactuses. At the end of the 5th year the plants are ready for their first cutting, and the healthy ones will bear well for 12 or 15 years. The cutting is begun at the base of the stem, where the leaves are more fully developed. 8 to 10 are cut at a time, and usually 3 or 4 cuttings are made each year, so that the average yield of each plant is about 32 leaves annually. Slowly, year by year, the cutting creeps nearer the top, and the space between the leaves and the ground becomes greater. When the top is reached, all the leaves which will ever grow have grown, and the plant is useless unless the seed stem has appeared, when it is left for the production of young plants. If it has not run to seed, then it is cut down and left to rot, the ground being ready again at once for replanting. But the rearing and cutting of this green gold of Yucatan is not all. There is a long process before it is ready to be sold under the hammer of an American or European auctioneer, in much the same way as cotton is dealt with on the Liverpool or Manchester exchanges. Crossing and recrossing each henequen plantation, small, toy-like, 2-foot gauge iron tracks are laid, on which small mule-drawn trolley cars convey the henequen leaves to the hacienda buildings. On some of the larger of the haciendas these tracks often cover 30 or 40 miles, and at first sight it would seem an unnecessarily expensive means of transit, and that it would be cheaper to cart it as an English farmer does his corn. But when you remember the cost of making level roads over miles of rock-strewn plantation, and that each fleshy leaf represents an average weight of 4 or 5 pounds, and that on a trolley car drawn by one mule can be packed 1,000 of these weighing about 2 tons, and needing 4 or 5 carts with mules and men to match, you see that the trolley method, after the original outlay, is far cheaper. On the trolleys, then, the henequen leaves are conveyed to the hacienda buildings, where an elaborate machinery is waiting to crush out the gold-yielding fibre. The track runs right into the building, the mule is unhooked, and returns once more to the plantation with an empty car for another load of fodder for the crusher. And while the empty car is returning, the leaves of the newly arrived laden car are being dealt with. 3 or 4 Indians set to work to arrange the leaves so that their black pointed ends are all in one direction. Next these thorny points are severed by a machete, and in small bundles of 6 or 8 the leaves are handed to men who are feeding a sliding belt-like platform about a yard wide, and on this they are conveyed to the machine. Before they enter its great blunt-toothed gaping jaws, they are finally arranged, as the sliding belt goes its unending round, so that they do not enter more than one at a time. Woe betide the Indian who has the misfortune to get his fingers in these revolving jaws of the gigantic crusher; and many indeed are there fingerless, handless, and armless from this cause. The leaves enter broadways, for the blunt-toothed rollers are a little wider than the longest leaves. On entering the first rollers the fleshy leaf is crushed like sugar–cane in a crusher. The sappy juices fly around, but the wet, dripping machine continues with its work, and the thick, greeny water runs into a trough below, to be carried away in a channel back to the fields. The leaf is passed from one to another, each crushing away more fleshy matter until the 4th or 5th roller has been reached, when it is no longer a leaf, but one mass of greeny yellow threads, in the hands of an Indian who is kept continually receiving it as it is thrown from the machine. The next process is the drying of the fibre, which takes place in drying yards. From the machine to these another trolley track is laid, and there on wire lines, as will be seen in our illustration, the fibre is hung in the scorching sun. The Yucatecan can always be sure of his weather, and the fibre is no more bother to him until the sun has thoroughly bleached the greeny yellow threads. 2 or 3 days of this sun bath is quite enough, and then the last process, before the Yucatecan rakes in his shekels, is the pressing of the fibre into bales ready for transport. This final process is very similar to our English hay trussing. The fibre is placed in the press, weighed and compressed into the smallest possible space, and bound with rope. But what becomes of the green pulpy waste which forms 90% of the fleshy leaves before it is put into the machine? Part of this is water, and the remainder, as the fibre is thrown off one roller to another, falls through the machine into a truck-like trolley awaiting it underneath. It is a mangled mass of verdure, and to the inexperienced eye as useless as the green water running away in the narrow channel. But the Yucatecan finds use for it, and it is carried to the corral, where we find a herd of cattle making a meal of it amid myriads of tormenting flies. The fibre is not sent direct from the grower to the market, but is passed through the hands of the large agents resident in the country, who ship it to the various ports. This has become such a trade in itself that one agent has grown so rich upon his commissions that he now runs a special line of steamers between Progreso and New York for the traffic, as well as holding the lion's share in the railway concerns of the peninsula. Owing to the shallow water at Progreso and the cost of dredging on coral beds, he has had to go to the expense of having his boats built specially for the traffic. But his flat-bottomed small draught steamers have made his family one of the richest of the money-grubbing ring in Yucatan, for there is money for everyone who touches the magic fibre, except the miserable Indian by whose never-ending labours the purse-proud monopolists of the peninsula are enabled to be ever adding to their ill-gotten gold. There are in Yucatan to-day some 400 henequen plantations of from 25 to 20,000 acres, making the total acreage under cultivation some 140,000 acres. The cost of production, including shipping expenses, export duties, etc., is now about 7 pesos (14 shillings) per 100 kilograms. The average market price of henequen is 28 pesos per 100 kilograms, so the planter gets a return of 400%. All this is obviously only possible as long as he can get slave labor, and the hideous truth about the exploitation of the Mayans is kept dark. The Indian gets a wage of 50 centavos for cutting 1,000 leaves, and if he is to earn this in a day he must work 10 hours. Near the big towns 75 centavos are paid, but practically, on many haciendas, it is so managed that the labor is paid for by his bare keep. There is much in the henequen agave besides its fibre which might be turned to commercial uses, but these side products, such as alcohol made from the juicy substance of the leaves, and paper made from the leafless stems of the plants, have so far been neglected. An enterprising German has started a rope factory near Merida, with a capital of $2.5 millions, but this was the first attempt at working up the hemp in the country. Henequen is cultivated in Cuba and the Bahamas, and the Germans have introduced its culture into East Africa, where they have planted 150,000 agaves. Whether it will thrive there is doubtful, but in both Cuba and the Bahamas it has been a failure, the plant for some reason degenerating and producing a poor fibre. End of Section 32.